North Korea last week commemorated the 70th anniversary of the Korean War armistice, or Victory Day as it is known in the regime, with a military parade and a show of diplomacy. For more, we're joined by Professor Brian Myers this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, the North showcased drones during the parade with an unmanned aerial vehicle that appears to be modeled after the U.S. Global Hawk surveillance aircraft. Now, Professor Myers, how is this possible?
Well, the basic American airframe is not classified, and since many of these drones have already gone missing in action, their inner workings can be reverse engineered to a large degree. Now, are they going to be quite as high-tech as the Global Hawk? No, but they don't really need to be. Seoul is very close to the DMZ after all, so a drone doesn't need the Rolls-Royce engine of an American drone that's, say, flying around Afghanistan and Pakistan. I think the spy capabilities of these North Korean drones are obviously much more limited, to put it mildly, but any step forward in their technology is something we should be concerned about, especially considering that the South Korean military was unable to shoot down even the very simple drones that flew over Seoul last December.
Right, not as high-tech or advanced as the U.S. Global Hawk. But, Professor, there are speculations that the technology might have been stolen or hacked by North Korea. Now, how likely is it, and is this a concerning matter?
Yeah, well, as I say, the actual airframe is not classified. That's all over the internet. And the thing about drones, any kind of military technology, is it's bound to go missing in action at some stage. Mm-hmm. Drones get shot down, they fall out of the sky, they collide with things. And it's therefore very likely that the North Koreans have got a hold of some of these American models and have been reverse engineering them.
Sure. Then let's talk about the military parade itself. There were lots of weapons on display, right? Including Hwasong-17, Hwasong-18 ICBMs, and also what appeared to be the North's first ever nuclear-armed unmanned underwater vehicle named the Haeil. Now, what's behind this grand display? Is it just showing off?
Well, basically, yes. That's what parades are for. They're supposed to make the domestic audience proud, while at the same time intimidating a foreign audience, the American enemy in particular in this case. North Korea is, by its own definition, a military-first state. The entire political culture is very militaristic. A very high proportion of the population is in some branch of the armed forces. As you can't help noticing when you travel around the country, you see people in uniform everywhere. And the military is really the only sector of society that is functioning at an international standard. So the sort of self-congratulation that our states engage in with respect to a broad range of accomplishments, economic growth, the popularity of our cultural exports, sports victories. In North Korea, virtually all boasting is concentrated on military or nuclear progress. And this propaganda boosts national pride and it legitimizes the state itself. But this time, in this Victory Day parade, there was an extra cause for boasting, namely the presence of high-ranking Chinese and Russian representatives. So this show of support is really important to the North Koreans, who in the past have often felt very alone on the world stage.
Sure. Now, speaking of self-congratulation, this Victory Day this year was even more significant with the fact, like you mentioned, there were delegations from Russia and China this year, right? Now, some watchers have noted that North highlighted more solidarity with Russia than the North did with China. Now, based on a press release from the North, now, what's your take on this?
It's not just a question of optics, because the North Koreans have actually recognized the independence of Donetsk and Luhansk, those two Russian-controlled territories in eastern Ukraine. So Moscow and Pyongyang really are very close together. And there's quite a tradition here, because even during the Korean War, when the Chinese were fighting and dying in enormous numbers on North Korea's behalf, the North Korean propaganda devoted a lot more space to praising the Russians. Now, a main reason why that preference is continuing now is because China's support cannot be relied upon to quite the same extent. As the North Koreans see it, Xi Jinping could come to a friendly understanding with the Americans at almost any time, whereas because of the Ukraine, Russia and the US are now on extremely hostile terms, and they're likely to remain that way for a generation at least. So the Russians can be expected to be much bolder in defying American pressure, and of course American sanctions too. And Russia's commodities are just what North Korea needs at this time.
Sure, that's why the North and Russia are also reportedly in active discussions on weapons exchange, right? Imports and exports. Then how likely is it that Russia has already gotten some weapons from the regime, even though it is absolutely illegal to do so? How is it possible?
Well, we've been hearing reports like this since last year. The US government has identified a Slovakian arms dealer who supposedly tried to broker deals between Moscow and Pyongyang. And the Ukrainians have recently been using North Korean rockets that they claim were somehow captured or intercepted from the Russians. Now, of course, Pyongyang and Moscow deny any such arms trade. But the thing is, the North Koreans make a lot of weapons and ammunition according to Russian designs and specs. So this stuff looks Russian. So it's probably being used in the Ukrainian war already, even if it can't be explicitly identified as North Korean. And it makes perfect sense for Putin to import crude but effective weaponry from a very friendly country that is probably exporting it at bargain prices. And best of all, the North Koreans are likely ready to barter their weapons for Russian food and other commodities. Now, as you say, it is illegal. It violates UN sanctions. But the very fact that the Russian defense minister was there at that parade a few days ago, smiling and laughing in the presence of Russian missiles, shows you that Russia does not care very much about the UN resolutions that it voted for years ago in the Security Council. The gloves came off in this fight a while ago, and the Americans can hardly expect the Russians to obey the sanctions regime at a time when Washington is arming the Ukrainians, including with cluster munitions, which many countries have sworn never to use. So in short, I would say we need to wait for some real evidence that this arms trade is going on, but it would be very surprising if it wasn't.
Right. Let's wait for more clues on how North and Russia have been backing up one another. Thank you so much for your insight this morning. You have a good day.
You too.